Members will now go to item 9, and this is our, I guess, our initial submission on the Kāinga Ora bill. Penny Perrott, welcome, Penny. This item is on page 35. It's commencing page 35. Penny, in your hand.
This bill is the first of two bills coming out of the Crown, which is designed to set up the Urban Development Agency. Kāinga Ora Homes and Communities Bill disestablishes Housing New Zealand HLC and brings together the resources within those two entities, plus part of Kiwi Build, into a new urban development agency. The bill indicates the objectives of that agency, the functions and operating principles, but does not go into any special powers that might be assigned to that agency. Our understanding is that there will be a second bill that comes out in the third quarter of this year, which will start to give that agency some of the powers that we have talked about in the past when we've had discussion documents on an urban development agency. So this bill doesn't do that, and so our submission is very much focused on the objectives, the functions and the operating principles. I think it's fair to say that this council has always supported in principle the concept of an urban development agency, and that's signalled in our submission. And we are also signalling support for the objective, which is about this agency contributing to sustainable, inclusive and thriving communities, which as a council we would certainly endorse. There are some elements of this bill that we think need to be strengthened. Particularly, there is no recognition that many of the functions that this agency will undertake in terms of urban regeneration, transformation, working with communities are already functions of local government. In fact, the bill does not talk at all about local government. We are lumped together in a terminology of any other party interested in housing. So our submission is that we need to have explicit recognition of the need for Kāinga Ora to engage with local government and also to work with local government on a government policy statement about what this entity should be doing. We also think that they need to operate in a context of community aspirations that are reflected in plans and strategies that a local community has gone through a public engagement and consultation process on, rather than just come in and really ignore the effort and energy that a local community might have put into its own plans. We also believe in the submission that this entity should really focus on places in a district where it can add value. So obviously that's on Crown land, but it could also be on land that is complicated or difficult to develop, for example, contaminated land areas, or where we might want to see growth and development, but the market is not interested in delivering in those areas. It shouldn't come in and do what the market is already doing, because that would be a wasted effort on behalf of that agency. There are some tweaks that we've suggested need to happen to the functions and operating principles, particularly around value for money and whole of life costs in terms of any infrastructure this entity might deliver or expect the council to deliver on its behalf. One big gap that we see here is that while there are specific clauses in this bill that refer to engagement and working with Māori, the board and the entity itself is not required to give effect to the Treaty of Waitangi or its principles. All it's required to have is the capability and capacity to understand the treaty. So we are recommending, and we've sought advice from Te Waka Angamua and also the Independent Māori Statutory Board staff, that this bill adopts a clause that currently exists in the Conservation Act, which expressly requires to give effect to the treaty as part of the board and the entity. And lastly, it's not very clear in the bill that this entity would be liable for development contributions. If in fact it's going to deliver considerable urban development and housing in any local government district, we believe that it should not be exempt from development contributions, and it needs to be quite explicit in the bill. So I'm happy to answer any particular questions about the draft submission. We have had up to today, 3 of the local boards provide their response to the draft submission, Albert Eden, Ōrākei and Waitemata. They all largely endorse what we have indicated in our draft submission. They also have indicated concern about an urban development agency having the ability to come in and ignore local plans or local community engagement on what happens in their area. So they are looking for some strengthening in the bill in those areas as well.
Thank you, Penny. So this is our first opportunity to provide feedback on the bill, and then there'll be further opportunity as the government start to discuss the powers. But this is an important stage and we're providing feedbacks, and the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, myself and some others have been discussing this. We hope that where it's sitting at the moment on your order paper satisfies you. Are there further questions on this? Councillor Newman. Questions? Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Penny, just a bit more elaboration, please, on how this entity, Homes and Communities, is going to work alongside council with our structures and plans, you know, our ATAP, for instance, and its own relationship back to the Crown for things like Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education. Is that elaborated at this point, or is that coming in the second stage?
Well, I think one of the reasons why the draft submission says that this bill needs to explicitly refer to how this agency is going to work with local government is really important. I don't think we can leave that to the next bill, which is just talking about special powers that might be assigned to this entity. And that's probably the crux of our submission, is this bill is very silent about how what this entity is designed to do is going to integrate with any council in terms of existing plans and strategies, in terms with any existing projects around infrastructure networks, those sorts of things. That's why we're seeking clarity now and not waiting till a later bill, which is almost after this entity's been set up.
Thanks, Penny. I think that's a really important point, Mr. Chair. Unless there's coordination between the factions, this is not going to work. There's a whole that's massive, and the community will be the loser.
Totally agree with you. Thank you. Councillor Hulse.
Thank you. It's just a bit of a chicken and egg discussion, really, because it does seem to me, and thank you for picking up so much of the complexity in here, that because of the lack of integrated thinking that's drawn a lot of this together, it's not clear to me whether the government policy statement on some of the work that this organisation will do is actually being drawn together independently by other parts of government, or if the bits of this organisation that have already started coming together are driving the government policy statement on what they think they should do. I guess, and the reason why I asked that, Mr. Chair, is there has been some quite confused thinking that's put some of this together. I'm just wondering, who is the separate entity in government who might be having a little bit more clarity of thought?
I think this will very much be like what happens with the GPS on transport, where that's largely pulled together by the Ministry of Transport, and then it's NZTA that delivers the GPS. While it doesn't say this in the bill, my understanding is that the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development will be responsible for pulling together the GPS for this entity, and Kāinga Ora will be responsible for delivering what is in that GPS. Our draft submission says it's not very clear whether the GPS will go further than the functions of Kāinga Ora and set up expectations for other agencies of the Crown, or in fact, do they look as though they're going to take it wider to other entities? And we've sought clarity that the GPS should only apply to Crown entities, not to local government, not to community housing providers, and not to private developers or developers. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's sort of really important because of the slightly confused nature of this, and very good attempt being made now through some of the work that's being done, the reshuffles in Cabinet, and getting a little bit more clarity into this whole area. But it would be really concerning if some of the slightly opaque thinking here flows then into a government policy statement that spills out of the edges of this entity. So if we're picking that up, that's really important, and it's a really good submission, Penny. Thank you. I'm happy to move if.
I've got a mover in Councillor Hulse, second in Councillor Hills. Any other questions before I go to comments? Question, Councillor Clow.
Penny, are Panuku happy with the strength of this submission?
So Panuku has been on the staff group across the family group who's been pulling this together. They've had an opportunity, and we've incorporated what they've said. They wanted us to be quite clear about the role of Panuku in the submission, but also that we need to get more explicit how this new agency is going to work, where we've already got plans and strategies in place. They also were quite strong, and the rest of the group agreed that this agency needs to add value. It shouldn't come in to do the job of local government. It should be adding value in places where it's too difficult or complicated, or where the market needs a catalyst development to get it seen the possibility about development and housing. If it only comes in to do what the market's already delivering, then that's a huge wasted opportunity.
Thank you. Have we concluded questions? No further questions? Councillor Newman.
Good morning, Penny. Thank you very much for this excellent submission, which I support. A couple of comments from me. I think the bill in its current form is not a good one. The big concern I have really is I think it's a deliberate attempt, in effect, to set to one side the objectives and policies of the regional policy statement of the Auckland Unitary Plan, to in effect try and create a blank canvas for whatever this agency may wish to do in the future. And I think that you're wise to reflect on the lack of identification of the role of local government, because I think that's deliberate. Actually, I really do. I believe that this is an attempt to, in effect, bypass the RPS provisions, because there's probably a lack of confidence within the agencies of central government in the RPS. But actually, the RPS of the Auckland Unitary Plan was designed specifically to try and achieve what can be delivered in the context of the compact urban form, which is economically and environmentally sustainable. The other thing is that I would have real concern about any legislation that doesn't explicitly require this agency in the delivery of new developments in the future to fund the consequential cost of growth through development contributions. I don't think that that's included because it's not intended. And the other thing is that I'm very suspicious of future moves on the rural-urban boundary, which I know that there's a future bill coming up, but I believe that there's a real attempt to, in effect, not provide for clarity around where Auckland begins and where our urban footprint will end, and that's a shame. The other thing that I would say, Penny, is that I think if government is looking for what works and what doesn't, there are some really poor outcomes that are achieved through the HASHA, the Special Housing Area legislation that was previously passed, and I think that this potentially upscales some of those big problems. So I thank the staff for pulling this submission together, which I think is a polite and diplomatic way of drawing to the attention of the advisors to government about the shortcomings of what has been attempted here. And I would imagine that if the bill is passed in its current form, it will probably not be workable, because I'm not sure it's going to be fundable. So thank you for this great piece of work, and look forward to more information on it.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to make a couple of observations on the comments we've made in the urban development functions section of the paper, particularly as they go to the reference to international experience and providing leadership and supporting innovation, because this notion of this urban development authority has been around for ages, and we seem to be moving very slowly. And there is a sense of urgency that is required here. A number of the moves to date, haven't worked despite best intentions, and I agree certainly with Penny's notion that this agency can't afford to just replicate what the current market's doing, not least of which is because the majority of people who would be the beneficiaries of this agency can't afford to get into that market, don't even get halfway there. So if we're looking at international experience, I don't know, it's probably not the time to draw comparisons to some of these successful programs overseas, but we'd hope at some point that our officers might look at some of these international examples and highlight them to the government, because that's clearly not happening. If you look at places like Chile, which had far more challenging housing crisis than New Zealand, and they had agencies the equivalent of this that were very innovative and certainly very cost effective. They were able to house 100 families on 5,000 square metres, for instance. The houses were largely half built, if we could say that. But people bought them themselves, so they were finished 50% finished. The basics were provided, and people then finished them at their leisure. There was a concern at the time, which you could see being voiced here, that these would result in slums and all sorts of negative social consequences. That didn't happen. In fact, the properties went up in value. The people took pride in ownership. And as I said, in the Auckland context in particular, we've got a whole swag of people that wouldn't even get to the starting line for that type of housing. But that's the sort of innovation that's required to make a difference, not just an urban development authority in itself just being a slight improvement on what the market's delivering. And they specifically went to the terrace type of housing. I remember through the unitary plan, that was going to be the big salvation, wasn't it, for Auckland? This duplication of build of 8, 10 houses that the developer would benefit from ordering the same materials, one plot of land, and there would be a consequent flow onto the price. That hasn't happened. Those terrace type housing are basically just about as expensive as a single. Someone's making an awful lot of money them. Anywhere I go in my ward where there's a lot of this kind of terrace type housing, they're all over $1 million, 1.1, 1.2, 1.4 million. No one's going to get into those other than people who've already got money. So I would hope that at some point we as a council signal to the government that we need more than a watered-down version of that. We need something really innovative, like they have done in countries like Chile. And in some ways, it's back to the future. Because if we go back to the big group housing that occurred around Auckland, in Manurewa, in Birkdale, in the 60s, you got your basic house, and you finished everything else off yourself. It wasn't 50% finished, but it was a lot less finished than current houses, and ordinary working families could do that. So I would suggest that in this field of a development agency, they have to really stretch the boundary now and come up with some New Zealand version of that 60s, and I would say that some of the examples of what's happening overseas is what they should be following.
Thank you. Member Henry.
Kia ora, Chair. First of all, thank you for working with IMSB and the inclusion of the treaty clause, because I think that's really important, that they don't get away with just wandering down the path by themselves, talking a good story and not having something that is there to fulfil the story. I never thought I'd be in an open forum and back the government, this government. But the urban development idea, or the authority ideas, has come about, and rightly or wrongly, from a position of the crisis. Well, whether it is a crisis or not is again is a moot point. But the government's response has been through a number of things, and one of those things is the establishment of an urban development authority. That it thinks it's going to have the power, and most probably wishes that it takes away the power from the council and all other councils around New Zealand to actually make a difference. Politicians know that their time on earth is very small, and even smaller when you're in power. And so I pat the government on the back for trying to think up of things, ways of getting people into housing. Is this the right way? Look, any help along the way is good. So I won't criticise the government on that. What I do think is coming, and the most important part, is the next bill. This is wishy-washy sort of palaver, make you feel good, wake up in the morning, yeah, cool, lovely day. But at the end of the day, you've got a bill that's coming that will have the mechanics of what powers the Urban Development Authority has. They should be like any other developer, like any other organisation who wants to build, and so they should be part of the, paying their way as they go, just like anybody else. We're supportive of the paper. We're supportive of the idea of an urban development authority, but the proof will be in the next bill, and we haven't taken the position, or IMSB, when I say we, IMSB hasn't taken the position yet of submitting our own submission to this bill, and also to whatever comes out in the next lot. Kia ora.
Thank you, Member Henry. Other speakers on this, members? There being none, it's moved by Councillor Hull, seconded by Councillor Hills. Thank you, Penny. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you.